where do I see myself as a South African in these large procurement programs that have high barriers also in some circumstances? How do we navigate that? Because it is a big and complex sector, but where do I get in as a small player? Minister, what you've also highlighted, we're dealing with in this country systemic challenges. These are not simple, easier challenges that we are looking at. And for us to drive any systemic change is going to require that multi-stakeholder collaboration and partnership. And I love that you're even speaking about from an educational perspective. The entire system needs to be speaking to where these plans are going, to what we're trying to achieve. And I think what really needs to land is, as we have these plans, we have these milestones, and you've got the IRP that's setting out all of these gigawatts. We've got the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan that is speaking very, directly to the need for localizing manufacturing. But I think what we need then is, and I guess maybe it's hearing from government, is how do we then operationalize it? What I'm imagining in these next 12 to 24 months is us effectively operationalizing these plans and us moving, again, the anchor for the season, the anchor for what we believe is important for South Africans is, let's move from policy to actual participation.
No, I agree.
It must move from the documents now.
Yes.
Minister, I want us to now go and I guess this all speaks to then procurement. So in these massive government programs that would be rolled out, and even when we think about what's commonly known to South Africans from a government procurement is procurement of electricity. So more focus on power generation projects. I think this year is probably 15-year anniversary of the renewable energy independent power producer. We should actually do a where were you at some point for this. But what's now become interesting, and I think what ordinary South Africans also need to understand, is that the idea of procurement now extends beyond power generation. So we're looking at wider procurement from a transmission perspective, from a battery perspective, and there's really then a pipeline of work that's then forming. Minister, could you maybe just in practical terms just break down then, highlighting some of this procurement that South Africans should be looking forward to, and where, if I'm a South African and I'm thinking of a transmission line, a program that's coming out, which, there's complaints that it doesn't necessarily allow for local participation. Where do I see myself as a South African in these large procurement programs that have high barriers also in some circumstances? How do we navigate that? Because it is a big and complex sector, but where do I get in as a small player?
Maybe just to start on the generation side, we have established a discipline of going out to the public through what we call bid windows. So we want to announce what I call a bid window on steroids. So we'll not be doing start, stop, because we want to stimulate industry. There must be see-through so that we increase capacity utilization, so on and so forth. So we're going to procure about 30 gigawatts, 11.9 of that is PV, 8.9, 11.1 is PV, 8.9 is wind, gas is 6 gigawatts and 4.5 gigawatts of battery. So there already there's an appreciation on working with DTIC, what should be locally procured, so on and so forth. So there's that one. But then we have introduced another one on the transmission. Your critique is valid. We have engaged with the industry. The industry was saying local industry, but the barriers are quite high. So the rationale is the following. I was saying that this is the first phase of a multi-phase program. We're going to do 14,000 kilometers of new transmission line. What we announced is 1,164. So one of the things that we set out to do is that with the initial phase, because we are learning, you don't want it to collapse because you are going to discredit the rest of the program. So we build sufficient guardrails to protect the program from collapsing, to make sure that it succeeds. So the requirement was that you must have built so many kilometers of transmission line. You must show that the finances are in place. Because we have not built any transmission lines of significance, it means by default there's no single South African company that will qualify. So we accept that criticism. And we make the point that the next rounds, because what we say is that the anchor of this, it will be a consortium by definition, because we are insisting that a minimum of 49% must be locally owned by local players. And then we're working with DTIC now to go into the components. The wires, what percentage of that must be local? The pylons, what percentage must be local? The steel that goes into the foundation, what percentage of that must? The transformers, the batteries, you mentioned them. And then that's where there's going to be participation of players. So here we wanted to ensure that these people who have done it before and have the financial muscle. Remember that you are self-financing. It's an EPC plus F, because we don't want to burden the fiscus. It will be like close to 20 billion rand. So people must bring the money. And so we are designing it in such a way from an ownership perspective, 49% minimum with locally owned. Then the key is in how we disaggregate the components that are going to supply transmission. I'm saying we're working with DTIC, we'll announce them. And you will see that, there's going to be big local participation, because we don't want to miss the opportunity by exporting the jobs. What do I mean by that? Manufacturing happens somewhere, bring finished products, and yet we say we're building an industry. So we're going to make sure that the lessons we learned from the initial stages of the build program on the generation side are going to be handy in helping us to construct a bit more efficient and elegant program on the transmission side from the perspective of local content without undermining the project to succeed. And then we're doing a lot on the distribution side. I said we are refurbishing the transformers, really transformers of that capacity on the distribution line. 100% of it, almost 100, is local. There's sufficient local market to do that. Where we don't have capacity in the large transformers, over 500 MVA, then you are in the big league now. So we want to, as part of this program, to ensure that we build sufficient domestic capacity. The problem with that size of transformers is that you don't buy them every day. Yeah, that's the downside. Also, when you buy them, it's a big ticket item. The small ones, we buy them every day. The volumes, we make your money in the volumes. And then on the big ones, we make your money on the margins. So we need to manage it in a manner that it doesn't undermine our industrialization ambition, the skills ambition, but ultimately the asset must be built and it must be affordable. Remember, when we build this asset, that cost of the asset is going to find its way into the tariff. So remember, there's nothing for free. Someone pays, and you know who's that person who pays is the end consumer. So in its design, we must always ensure that we protect the end consumer. And that's why it's important that we look closely into the pricing, because ultimately it has an impact on the price of electricity. So, I mean, to your question, yes, I accept the criticism. You're absolutely correct. We engage with INDA. You'll see the next phases will start to relax. These chaps who are 49%, by the time we go phase number 7, we are building the next 2,000 kilometers of transmission line. They are going to show that, but I've participated in around 1, 2, 3. I've got the skill to do that. And also the financiers are able to back them. Because there's a risk in backing someone who doesn't have the requisite skills. And if you are unable to complete the project, we're going to penalize you. That's how the rules work. So it's important that we design it in a manner that we minimize the prospects of failure and enhance the prospects of success. Yeah.
I think it's an important point that you're making in the design of it. And I think what has to then be coming through in the design is that intentionality needs to come through. I think sometimes when we roll out these programs, that there's a lot of assumptions that are made. So there is the assumption that in a number of years, this entity would be ready. But what have we put in place to actually, and maybe, Minister, is that a question I can pose? Is that something you can look at in how, beyond maybe just even from the transmission, in this transmission program, how do you actually ensure and you penalize it now? So instead of, because as a South Africans looking at it, we're saying, okay, in a couple of years it should be there, but now what is being done now to actually make sure that in a couple of years when the opportunity is there, we are going to see participation, and also not participation from the usual faces, because this is an opportunity of bringing in a new industry.
No, I agree with
How
you.
are we going to actually ensure that it's new participants?